just to let you know that Libertarian is both a political party and it's a philosophy. And it's the philosophy based on what they used to call classical liberalism from the 1700s. The same kind of philosophy the country was based on. And the philosophy itself is based on the way humans interact. So what motivates you the most? Punishment or reward?
Reward?
Yeah, I mean, if I said if you got a poor grade on this, you'd go to prison for a year, would that be motivating?
No.
But that's what government does, right? Government punishes people. It also, redistributes wealth. Now, is it fair that, say, you're an entrepreneur and you came up with this thing that makes people's lives a little bit easier, and you make a lot of money? Is it right for the government to take that money from you and then they take a 70% cut and then give the remaining 30% to people who will vote for them? Is that fair? I mean, would that motivate you? It's kind of negative, isn't it? And I'll put it, and then they not only do that, but it would be kind of nice if they would just leave it at that, right? But then they go further and they say, was it you're the problem? That's why we got to take the money from you because you're selfish. And we got to give it to these people, even though we're just giving it to them because they vote for us. But, I mean, doesn't that make it even worse? I mean, why would you want to be an entrepreneur? Why would you want to create an economy? Why would you want to do anything? Government doesn't create anything. I mean, how much profit did the government make last year? Well, they don't make a profit. They do go into debt, though. Was under Obama, they went $10 trillion in debt. I know. That's a big number. I can't even comprehend it. And then with Trump, I mean, I'm not a Republican, but since he's been, I think $3 trillion have come back into the U.S. economy from abroad. My brother worked for IBM, and I know like 10, 15 years ago, they had like 70,000 employees in India. And I thought they were going to become an Indian company. Just leave this country and move to India. I mean, that's where the bulk of the employees are. And then they wouldn't have to pay our taxes here, which are just incredibly higher than everybody else on earth. And not only that, but, you make money in India. Okay, well, India taxes that, right? That seems fair enough, right? But when the money comes back here, we tax it again. No other country does that. So they taxed it maybe at 20%, and then they brought it back here, and we taxed it at 35%. And you can't compete. Well, anyways. Yeah, you don't want to do it on issues. Since we're a philosophy, what is the philosophy of? Can anyone briefly describe what libertarianism is?
Well, didn't you explain it kind of where it's you can live your life as long as you're not hurting anybody else?
Yeah, to me, it's like do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which I think is the most brilliant phrase ever created. Most people don't understand that, but you can't go around saying, well, gee, I don't like this group. They're going to go to hell. And what would happen in like the 50s and stuff, if you were renting an apartment from somebody and they didn't like you because you were part of a certain group, they would kick you out. Your employer would fire you. Your family would leave you. I mean, it was just, people didn't allow you to be anything other than a very rigid thing. I mean, it was awful. So that's what I would say is libertarianism. And was it on the quiz? When you take the quiz, you're going to notice that, and I suppose I could, if people want it, if you could pass quizzes around. That's the quiz, the graph there. But on one axis, it says personal rights or whatever. And then on the other, it says the economy. Now, when people are allowed freedom, with freedom, you're allowed to interact with other people without interference when you're free. And that interference typically comes from government. And when you're able to interact with other people, you create an economy. That's where an economy comes from, freedom. And then you got the human rights side. So if you notice on the graph, libertarians believe in human rights and freedom. Democrats say they believe in human rights, and the Republicans say they believe in freedom. They each claim only half of what you really should want. Now, has anyone ever gotten anyone, I mean, you got into a discussion with somebody, and did you ever change anyone's opinion? Well, well, just to let you know that to me, politics is philosophy in action. So, just philosophically, have you got anyone to agree with you on any point?
I've gotten them to see my point of view on said subject, and maybe they agree with what I'm saying, but they don't change what they think or something like that, if that makes sense.
Well,
Like they agree that like I'm saying, like, okay, well, that's your opinion and I respect that, but this is mine instead.
yeah. I never hear that anymore. I respect that.
I know, it's weird, right?
Yeah.
I only have like one friend who's like that. She's like my best friend.
Yes.
She's complete opposite of me on everything. But she's like, that's her opinion, I respect that. And we're still friends even if we have like a debate or something like that, but we're still friends afterwards.
Yeah, when I was growing up, you used to hear the phrase all the time, I don't agree with you, but I will defend your right to say it. People would say that all the time. You never hear that anymore. I don't know. There must have been some group decision. Politically, it's incorrect or something. But, you can change people's minds. Now, it's not going to be 100% successful, but it's better than zero. But the way to do it, and I was looking online, Googling stuff, and I noticed that there were a number of articles on how the FBI, as hostage negotiators, changed people's minds. And it turns out it's exactly the same thing that you do when you try to sell an idea or a product. And it's amazing. So what would you say is the most important thing when it comes to trying to talk to somebody and find out what they're like and then how to change it? You know this.
Sure. Talk to them, introduce yourself. I mean, it depends on what kind of situation you're in socially, I guess.
Not really. I mean, if you're a hostage negotiator or you're a salesman.
Oh, if you're talking about taking hostages and whatnot, I'd say waterboarding is probably a way to get answers from people.
Well,
Is it ethical? Some people might say yes, some people might say no.
I mean, that's like using an Iron Maiden from the Middle Age. I mean, this cage with spikes in it, and you can't rely on stuff like that. You gotta get people to. You gotta say something that you can believe in, rather than something that you know is coerced. Active listening. When somebody listens to you, how do you feel? I mean, they don't interrupt, they don't do anything like that, but they're listening.
I think that's right.
You what?
Makes me feel respected.
Yeah. Would you, when you were done talking and they started talking, would you be more likely to listen?
Yes.
You guys back there agree? You can't move that desk back any further, can you?
No, I tried.
Oh, I'm sure you will. Yeah, you gotta, and then besides just listening, what else do you need to do? I mean, as part of listening.
You have to look like you're listening. You have to like keep eye contact. Like if you're listening, but you're like, what doesn't look like you're paying attention.
Well, you're right on that. You are right. And then, was it you don't interrupt them, you don't disagree, you don't evaluate, you nod your head sometimes, you say, uh-huh, you know, just to let them know that, hey, you know, you're not brain dead now, you're still listening, you're not ignoring them. And I would throw into this, God, I had this idea when I was in college that, you know, we don't use words the same way. You know, I might say liberty, but you know, that means something to me. But when I was in college, I discovered that one is I use all the words like freedom and whatever, and I had to really stop and think, I don't even know what these words mean. It was never explained to me at all by my socialist teachers. And my teachers did tell me they were socialists when I was going to school. So I didn't know. I mean, but even words that I knew the definition of, other people had different definitions. So what would that tell you as part of listening?
Is that what you say might?
That what?
That what you say might be different to the other person.
Right. So it's okay maybe for point of clarification, you're not interrupting them just so that you can say something, but if you could ask them what they mean by that word.
By that statement.
And that would allow you to better understand what they're saying. And I ran across that problem all the time. And then, in fact, they would tell me it meant one thing, and then they would use it in several different definitions when they were telling me what they believed in. You know, it was just like, huh? Well, it doesn't mean all those different things. You know, it has a meaning, not a bunch of meanings. So it's interesting. What else? Now, after you've listened, what are you creating on their part? Now, she said, well, she felt respected. So what kind of, how do they feel about you listening?
They feel heard.
What?
They feel heard.
Well, yeah. And you're creating, I guess,
Like a bond, sort of.
yeah, empathy. So they're beginning to understand where you're coming from just by the sheer fact that you're listening. Most people don't listen. And I know that better than a lot of people because I used to have ADHD. You know, you can't listen. I mean, you've got too much energy. You're just bouncing all over the place. And so it makes life a little tough. But, and then as part of that, you know, you ask open-ended questions, which gets them to talk rather than, you know, yes or no. You don't want a yes or no. You want an open-ended question. It's non-judgmental, and then get them to expound more. And then again, that also shows interest. It shows that you're listening. And then you again continue with what we'd call the minimal encouragements. You want them to continue to speak, and it gives you more, in a way, it gives you more control. So, again, the minimal encouragements would be like the and that kind of thing. Then what's the next stage that you go to then? You're demonstrating, you got them talking, and you're delving into what their ideas are so that you can understand it better. So you have the active listening, you have the empathy, and then what? Well, you've created a rapport now. Again, that bond back and forth. So a rapport is when the person who's doing the talking feels it from you, the listener. It creates trust. And as part of it is like mirroring. You repeat maybe while you're listening and they're talking, you repeat back maybe a few of the words that they just said or a phrase. Again, it shows you're listening. You paraphrase something, which is even a little more powerful. You reword what they just said in your own words and repeat it back to them. Then they know that you're actively thinking about it. And then what they call emotional labeling. You'll never help it. You'll never get in a discussion that involves 100% reason and logic. It never happened. It will never, ever happen. There's always emotion in there. You got to remember that. So, you give their feeling a name. Maybe it's hostility or whatever, but give it a name. And then identify with how they feel. Now, you're not justifying how they feel. You're just identifying with it. Because you probably had similar situations where, you were actively angry or whatever about something. And then again, don't comment on the validity of their feelings. If you did that, they would know you're lying. So don't do that. And then what happens? Well, you got an idea of it. You start out listening, then we go to empathy, and then we go to rapport, and then what? They start listening to you, right?
Yeah. Sure.
I knew you knew it.
I have to think really hard. I got it.
Yeah, I can see why you sit in the back. Yeah, I'm always amazed, you set up rows of chairs, and you get more out than what you're expecting, and everyone sits in the back row, Well, you can't talk to them from the front. I mean, they're way back there, You gotta move back where they are. So sometimes I almost feel like taking out the chairs, or not bringing in enough chairs, or they kind of control things like that. But yeah, you get influence. Now you have influence with them. So once they trust you, you've earned the right to work on a problem solving with them together. Otherwise, they know you haven't. If you haven't listened to them and you don't understand what they're saying, they're not going to allow you to work with them to solve a problem. Like the FBI, they want to solve a hostage situation. The person wants something, right? Now they can work with them on coming up with maybe a better solution, hopefully, to the problem. So what kind of things can you do? Well, there's something they call effective pauses. Do you use pauses when you talk to people? And it's done deliberately, right? And what does that do for you?
Sometimes it'll help make a point.
Right. You give a nice pause, and then how put it, it gets their attention. And then you make your point.
It's like the line from Despicable Me, and we are going to steal on the moon, and that's like big dramatic. And like, it makes sense. You use pauses like that to make a point.
Well, yeah, they do that in plays all the time, or on some of those, especially those like 1920 films, where they can't actually, there's no actual words, and so they got to do it with the eyes, and.
Especially dramatic, like from stage, because like no one in the part back can like see it. It's really dramatic.
Yeah. Of course, they overdo it, but that's.
That's theater for you.
And then there's the what we call the use of if. IF. So, how put it? It's kind of hard to describe, but say you're talking to somebody, and you've listened, you've done all this and that, and they've got some objection to why what you're suggesting wouldn't work. So you could say something like, if it were possible, would you want it? You see what that does? They say it's not possible, but you come back and you say, well, if it were, would you want it? All right. That's powerful, right? What if we did implement it? Would it be a good thing? See, now suddenly you got them thinking. I go to like Tea Party meetings, and they're all about free markets. And I got up in front of them and said, well, how do you feel about a free market in politics? And they just they were speechless. We don't have a free market in politics. We can't get our word out. Except, things like this, or like me having people take a quiz at a gun show. But they were speechless. But they were thinking. And they were thinking that, yeah, we should have a free market in politics. But no one ever brought it up like that. The reverse. It's kind of like reverse psychology, right? What's one thing that government does that it should not be doing? You can word that any way you want. I mean, what's one thing that government's not doing that it should be doing, or whatever? But it's a way to get people to examine their own thoughts, because we all, until they're examined, we all hold contradictory thoughts, and somehow they just, they never come together unless somebody asks the right question. And then you begin to think, well, gee, they are contradictory. And that makes you, re-examine what you're thinking. And a life unexamined is a life not worth living. A lot of people leave out the benefits. When you're trying to sell something to somebody, an idea, a concept, or whatever, you're doing it because it has benefits. Okay, but if you don't explain what the benefits are, they're not going to buy it. I mean, salesmen know this. You got to explain the benefits. Don't forget to do that. And this is a real cute one. It's a button. So, yeah, well, not not that kind of button. It's the kind of button that, remember the Staples commercial, whatever, they'd hit the button and it was, how put it, said something like, I can do that. Something like that. I don't know, it was really silly, but So if there were a button in front of you that you could push that would immediately repeal and or remove a government program or law, would you push it? So you're advocating for something, and then you're saying that all they have to do is push that button, and it's done. Would you do it? And a lot of times it just ends all argument right there. Yeah, you might say, yeah, I'd push it. But again, you got to get them to think differently. You got to get them to think out of their normal mode of thinking. And what's the final thing? I'll put it, I don't know why, but there's always like 5 points to everything. And the final one is always the same. Huh?
Conclusion?
I still didn't hear it.
Conclusion, I was thinking of writing stuff where you write a paper, you start with your entrance statement, and then at the end you conclude the whole thing by tying it together with what you started out at the beginning.
Well, yeah, it kind of, well, yeah, kind of does that, but what's the final thing?
I guess securing the deal.
If what?
Like where you secure the deal, like you finish the deal.
Yeah. Why are you sitting in the back? You should be, right? You should be sitting in the front.
That was the right answer right there.
You should be teaching.
That would be interesting.
Well, yeah, you got to close the deal. And we've got a president that says this now. But yeah, you got to close the deal. You got to get change. And how are you going to get change?
By closing the deal.
What was that?
By closing the deal.
Well, yeah, but you got to get them to take an action. You know, and it could be like if you're libertarian, it could be as simple as liking us on Facebook and getting some emails once in a while, or come to our convention that we have every year, or the problem is if you don't get them to do something, then the media, they're just going to hear this constant onslaught from the media, and they will go back to their original way of thinking. So you would have accomplished nothing. But if they take action, then suddenly you're changing them. They will incorporate what you were trying to get them to agree to in the first place. And that's what you want. Otherwise, and I'll put it, the reason people fail to persuade is, first of all, they skip steps 1 through 3 and jump right to influence, and then don't follow it up with the sale. So out of the 5 points, they only use 1. And you'll never sell to anybody, ever. And even with salespeople, I mean, like number 5 is, you got to ask them all, do you want to buy? You have to ask, because they're never going to tell you. Oh, yeah. Oh, God, sign me up. No, you got to ask, because at least in Minnesota, people are polite, right? No, we could be stabbing you in the back, but we're polite. So, we don't say, oh, God, we're going to buy. No, we don't do that. So, how put it? And then part of change is teaching. You got to remember that you just don't provide the answers. If you provide the answers to people, they won't change. And they won't change because they didn't have to come up with the answers. You want them to think. If they don't think, they're not going to change. So you got to not give them the answers, You got to lead them to it, but you don't give it to them. And then, of course, by teaching, you got to know the subject, of course, a lot better than the people you're teaching, right? So you become better. Shouldn't be afraid to do it. And then I use the quiz. Nice thing about the quiz is, first of all, everyone likes it. And when I give the quiz, I'm smiling a lot. Always smiling, especially if I'm on a lot of, like, at the gun show or whatever, I'm smiling. And then I get, I guess I get a little goofy or whatever, but I get people to take the quiz. And then some people land in a scary spot, but I'm still smiling. I'm non-judgmental. And that's the way it should be. And then if they land like, say, libertarian, well then, usually they don't know they think libertarian. So at that point, then you can try to close the deal. And say, oh, here, sign up for free emails or whatever. And a lot of people do that. And then even if they don't land libertarian, I give them a bunch of little quizzes, these pocket quizzes. And they'll take it back home to their friends or whatever. And people like taking the quiz. They really do. And they don't have to be libertarian to convince them. They just, they can give them the quiz and then they'll take it. And it does wonderful things. It kind of bypasses a bunch of stuff. Makes it easier for you. And just some other, don't debate. Debating somebody's worthless. It's a waste of time. Political debates are even worse. They're absolutely wasteful. And you can't hold a politician accountable for what they say, and usually you can't hold them accountable for what they do. So, I mean, we've seen lots of examples like that, all that stuff going on with the FBI and stuff. No one's being held accountable for anything. And if your system of persuasion doesn't work, just remember, insanity is doing something over and over and over again and expecting different results. You're doing something wrong if you're not persuading people. So you got to go back to the basics and figure it out what you're doing. When I worked in insurance, what the sales department would do is they didn't send out one salesman, they sent out two. The one salesman watches the client or the potential client and to see what's working and what isn't working. And then afterwards, of course, they would get together and say, well, he didn't buy that or whatever. You didn't make the sale there. So you might go with a friend or something, which will help in learning how to sell or persuade. And then there's some try to communicate without the use of negatives. Politicians like use traps, particularly the Democrats. They try to make us answer a question that makes us sound negative. Well, don't bother answering that question. Most politicians don't answer questions in debates anyways. They give you an answer to a different question. But you can reword the question. I would simply reword the question in a way that's acceptable and then answer it. Because if you answer it the way they want, the question that they want you to, it will reflect badly. And I've been in a lot of debates, and I think what have I done? I've run for office 18 times or whatever. So for Congress, for Minnesota House and Senate. Was it for Minnesota State Auditor, Minnesota Secretary of State? I've run for City Council. I've run for, was it Mayor? See, then sometimes you get into this like, oh, we can't do that. We have to transition into it. Okay, well, don't buy into that. You can argue over the transitions all you want. Discuss the goal. It's the goal that's important, not the transition. And then people learn best through stories. I mean, that's why Homer resonates so much, or Shakespeare plays, or whatever. They're stories, and people love stories. We're programmed to like stories. It helps us to remember. So like if you read a good history book, you'll notice that it does a great job of telling history as a story. And you need to do the same thing. And don't come off like, oh yeah, it's the best thing on the world. I gotta have a little bit of enthusiasm and in order to get people to listen to you. Just real quicker, to me, liberty is freedom tempered by human rights. So it's, and freedom is your ability to interact with others without government interference. Human rights are based on property. What is the property that is the greatest property that you own? You got it, but say it. Yes. Man, you got that look on your face. Like, well, yeah, you own your. How put it? There's two philosophies in life. Either you own yourself or you don't. And we say you own yourself. And if you own yourself, you have the right to defend yourself. No question about it. And then, well, I guess I'll let you go through this other stuff here. When I'm all done here, but just remember that the libertarian philosophy has created, well, is new. It's only been around since the 1700s. The other philosophy has been around since the beginning. It's not new, even though they keep saying it is. That the libertarian philosophy allows for the greatest individuality. It allows you to be yourself. And people are naturally self-organizing. I mean, look at any group. Was it like in sports? Somebody will come out as the head of the team. You look at anything, and you can see self-organization there. Animals do it. They have pecking orders. So we automatically organize. And think about it. Why should we organize to create a government to organize? Makes no sense. So, like healthcare, why does the government need to organize healthcare? It's already organized. It just isn't organized by government. And once you pass a law, there's a lobbying group that wants that law to never, ever change. Now, if it's done at a state level, you've got 50 states that are competing with one another. And states do pay attention to what other states are doing. And if the law is bad, they won't enact it. If the law is good, there's a high probability that probably half of them will enact it within, say, 5 years. And there'll always be a few holdouts. But that's competition. And without the ability to compare, there's no value. Now, when the federal government handles anything, there's no comparison. You can't compare anything to anything. And everything has no value. So government schools, I mean, you know, if the only school you could go to was a government school, you would not be able to make the argument that homeschooling is better, or that a non-government school is better, because there's no comparison. So without comparison, there's no value. And government doesn't want you to compare because they want to be in control. So, in a libertarian philosophy, we want that comparison. And that has brought the greatest degree of human prosperity, invention, peace, and discovery in all of humanity since the 1700s. Everyone benefits. Just no system's absolutely perfect, but some systems are far superior. And I would say liberty is.